In today's Neville Goddard-based conversation, we're going to reflect upon this mind map that I've put together called Causation Within Consciousness. And the premise of this conversation is based on this quote in which he shared with us: "A new idea will not become part of your common currency of thought until it has been repeated over and over and you begin to live by it." So we know that on the day-to-day journey, we carry on within ourselves inner conversations, inner dialogues, thought processes that are either related to our vision or states of harmony within, as we've been discussing states of consciousness and harmony in the last video where I discussed part of the Master Key System by Charles Haanel. We are also interpreting the experiences that we are having with people, with information, with environment, and so forth. And this interpretation is what is impressing the subconscious to re-externalize further expressions of those interpretations. What we are doing when we imagine these attributes, inner dialogue these attributes in relation to or in disharmony to anything, is we're planting the seeds. What we want is a faithful inner dialogue, inner conversation in relation to whatever it is that we are doing, whatever it is we are experiencing, so that we can not only bring forth our vision, but also experience more of this inner transformation to further organize our inner dialogue, as we've been taught to order our inner conversations. What this does is it transforms our concept of self, our self-image. We become more of that person that is in harmony with that vision that we see when we imagined it to be true. That's you at the end. You are becoming that person. This is the journey to the realization of the vision. So we want to remain faithful via our inner conversations to maintain this alignment with our vision. And as we have been discussing, we are guided from within. We receive information from within that guides us to the destination. We call this hunches, inspirations, intuition, inner voice. It's guiding us from within. The key is, are we allowing the space for this information to show up, to be received within? So when he speaks of a new idea will not become part of your common currency of thought until it has been repeated, he is also speaking about receiving via the state of mind the accurate inner conversations and inner dialogue, and further encouraging those inner dialogues and inner conversations that are related to your vision. So one of the questions we want to ask ourselves on the journey is, what are we imagining, or what are we interpreting? And it is revealed by how we communicate with ourselves as well as others and our behaviors and what we do. Because what we do is also what we are imagining. Because we look at it from the perspective that the source is the imagination. What we are imagining is being impressed on the subconscious and then externalizing in what we would call unconscious or subconscious behaviors, actions, interpretations, responses, which, if they are undesirable, a lot of times we call it reactivity. We feel reactive. And what are we reacting to? Well, we're going to go through a process which I had learned from The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale, which I used to work with for many years since 2007. And it's a process that we can integrate Neville's quotes into so we can further identify these attributes that we are identifying with within ourselves, what we are imagining, a lot of times subconsciously, that seems to be recreating the bridge of incidents from the perspective of those attributes or those interpretations, those assumptions, more specifically put, that we want to exclude out of consciousness so we can create a more flow-based, harmony-based journey to the destination, and thus automatically, as he states here, engage in the thought processes or the imaginal scenes or the inner interpretations that are one of harmony and live by it. Essentially, we have then adopted the consciousness. Now, we discussed this in the last video where we were speaking of the Master Key System-based quotes and how consciousness is what we are looking to modify or change or affirm in harmony with our vision as a result of not only working with the master key system, this information in this video and the other videos that we've been sharing. And what this does is it changes what we refer to in the personal development space as the self-image, or as Neville refers to, the concept of self. What we're interested in doing is imagining the version of you that is one with the vision. We already did it when we assumed that it was done, when we saw ourselves at the end and we committed to that end. We moved down the journey to the realization of that end. And that version of you, as discussed, one of the things that I like to do is have a conversation with that version of you, because that brings us into an inner dialogue that is reflective of the vision, which we call ideal state of mind. An ideal state of mind is something that we want to maintain. And this process here, put together by Dr. David Harold Fink, which I learned from Strangest Secret, which it is referred to as the 6 steps for realizing success, can help us maintain the state of mind that's reflective of the vision and identify any kinds of limiting or disempowering interpretations, a lot of times from our past, and change it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these 6 steps, we're going to infuse it with some Neville Goddard quotes, and get into discussion. And my trust is that you're going to be able to work with this in a way to help bring forth a more flow-based journey to what you desire to bring forth. Number 1 is to set yourself a definite goal. Number 2, quit running yourself down. Number 3, stop thinking of all the reasons why you cannot be successful, and instead think of all the reasons why you can. Number 4, trace your attitude back through your childhood and try to discover where you first got the idea you couldn't be successful if that's the way you've been thinking. Number 5, change the image you have of yourself by writing out a description of the person you would like to be. Number 6, act the part of the successful person you have decided to become. So let's go through this. Number 1, set yourself a definite goal. And Neville states, such acceptance of your desire is like dropping seed, fertile seed, into prepared soil. And this is the prepared soil of the subconscious mind. For when you can drop the thing desired in consciousness, confident that it shall appear, you have done all that is expected of you. So we set a goal and we commit to it. Number 2, quit running yourself down. So this is where we reveal inner dialogues, inner interpretations, inner conversations, interpretations in relation to people, environment, circumstance, ourself, and we change them to further form that self-image that is reflective of the vision, to embody the identity. And Neville states, the reason men condition their desires is because they constantly judge after the appearance of being and see the things as real, forgetting that the only reality is the consciousness back of them. So when experiences are had in the 5-sensory world that seem to deny the vision, create unnecessary resistance, we want to recognize that these are interpretations from within. And these interpretations are where we might be internally and mentally overthinking and exhausting ourselves. So when we recognize that we're having these thought processes, then we want to go into number 3, which is stop thinking of all the reasons why you cannot be successful, and instead think of all the reasons why you can. Now, this is very much in relation to the 7-day mental diet video that I've done, and a second discussion on that, and I'll probably do another one, in which Emmett Fox states that it's not a negative thought, but the dwelling in the negative thought that we're looking to not do, because when we dwell in a negative thought that is not in harmony with the vision or any other negative thought in relation, we move down a different thread and thus experience a different convoluted journey to the destination, something that we might not desire. And Neville says, but the cause of it all was my assumption and my faithfulness of that assumption. But to be worried or concerned about how of your desire, maturing is to hold these fertile seeds in a mental grasp, and therefore never to have dropped them in the soil of confidence. So that's interesting, the soil of confidence. Subconscious mind is one of confidence because it reflects what has been impressed. So the things that we have been thinking about as far as the reasons why we cannot are previous interpretations from past that we want to change. And as we change these interpretations from our past, then what is expressed and what is revealed is more of a harmony-based inner dialogue that is related to the vision, or harmony-based inner imaginal interpretation, or inner conversations. And as we've been discussing, this, what we are imagining, is what we are revealing in our behaviors and outer world circumstances, experiences, and interactions with people, environment, circumstance, and information. So then we move on to number 4. Track your attitude back to your childhood and try to discover where you first got the idea you couldn't be successful, if that's the way you've been thinking. So Neville says, if I fall into a state, I do it wittingly or unwittingly, but I fall into a state. Remaining in the state, suddenly the stump comes out. Someone begins to appear in my world who is instrumental in making me move forward in the direction in which I should go. So we have, when we set a goal, say you want to build a business, you want to achieve a certain level of entrepreneurial success, you want to bring forth an ideal relationship, the outer world begins to change to reflect that vision. People show up in the most unexpected ways. Ideas, hunches, and inspirations are received within. Actions are taken. And the outer world changes to reflect that vision. But for some reason, if we seem to have inner resistance or as experienced as reactivity in relation to our journey, then one of the things we want to do is apply the concept of revision, which is to go back to, a lot of times in childhood, and observe where those experiences seem to play out again in the current day life and change how we relate to those experiences through the process of revision, which is to imagine it happening a different way. Now, this is something that a lot of people work with therapists or psychologists to go back and change that relationship to that experience that they've had in childhood. Now, we're not just speaking of traumatic situations. We're also speaking of inner interpretations in regards to bringing forth success, such as fear of rejection or fear of criticism, or looking for unnecessary approval and validation before acting in the way that is going to bring forth the result. In other words, going to number 6 here, acting the part, living the part, representing the part that is reflective of that vision, the ideal state of mind. If we have this kind of inner resistance, we have the opportunity to apply the revisional technique, which is to go back into our imagination at the end of the night, preferably before sleep. And although I found you could do this throughout the day, as long as you are receptive and allowing and not overly thinking and overcritical about the process or what you are imagining to be ideal. And see it have played out a certain way, a different way, a way it would have been ideal. Such as, for example, if you were growing up and you experienced a lot of rejection when you were hanging out on the playground and you noticed that they weren't accepting you. This way of thinking, or what has been impressed on the subconscious at that stage of your life, might be continuously playing out in theater on your day-to-day journey, and thus creating unnecessary inner resistance when you move towards making a sales call or certain leadership propositions and so forth in regards to communication. What we can do is we can imagine it to happen a different way. And one of the ways that I like to do it is to imagine my higher self, or the version of me that I am today, in the playground or in communication with the child, having a conversation and discussing how everything that I have and achieve and are moving forward is as a result of the learning that I'm having in that particular experience. Now, some might also decide to change it, to imagine it to happen in a different way. The main thing is we're tracking back to the attitude, ideally to as far back as we can go, and changing how we relate to it. And as we change how we relate to it, what we notice is, number 3, we stop thinking of the reasons why we cannot be successful and start to automatically think of the reasons why we can. And thus going back to the first quote here from Neville, where he states, "A new idea will not become part of your common currency of thought until it has been repeated over and over and you begin to live by it." So you're changing the inner interpretations that are stored within the subconscious to be one of how you see yourself to be, the ideal self-image that is reflective of the vision. Which brings us to number 5. And in relation to this is what is happening. Change the image you have of yourself by writing out a description of the person you would like to be. So you could write it out, you could imagine it, you can create affirmations, you can have inner dialogues, you can place yourself in environments that bring forth that ideal self-image. Surround yourself with information that brings forth that ideal self-image that is reflective of the vision, and you will change. This is how the current self-image was formed, and this is how the current self-image can evolve to be in relation to that vision that you desire to see brought forth. And Neville states, "For the world that is described from observation must be, as thus described, relative to the describing observer." So we've been discussing this. The only interpreter is you, and you have the power to interpret reality or your experiences from any way that you see as in harmony and in relation to your vision. And if subconsciously, unconsciously, certain thought processes are brought to the surface in which we think and thus create unnecessary resistance in relation to negative thinking, we can change those inner interpretations and change certain experiences that we've had in our past so that we don't recreate that same thought process again. I would also complement this with the 7-Day Mental Diet by Emmett Fox, because that's conscious practice of, if the negative thought shows up, to recognize that it's the dwelling in certain thoughts that bring us into different states of mind. So when he says, "So I fall into a state, I do it wittingly or unwittingly," we want to ask ourselves, what is the causative factor of going into different states of mind? And then finally, number 6, act the part of the successful person you have decided to become. When you recognize that selecting the vision, having the vision impressed in the subconscious, automatically brings forth this successful person, then it's authentic and there is no pretending, because you're one with the vision. And what we want to do is maintain it. So if we observe certain reactive-based emotions, then we're noticing that we're not integrating with the 5 sensory experience as much as in harmony as we can with the vision. And so thus we want a more flow-based journey to the vision. And we do this by applying this information and having the change happen with consciousness. So you automatically play the part of the person that is in harmony and in relation with the vision. And so Neville states, if a physical fact can produce a psychological state can produce a physical fact. That is same to be said about the behaviors, how we relate to people, the opportunities that show up, how we relate to the opportunities. Those are interpretations that are formed within, assumptions that have been hardened into fact. And just as much as a physical environment or what someone says or a conversation can stimulate a certain state of mind, you can also change how you relate to that particular attribute so that you don't find yourself going into a different state of mind, but rather maintaining your ideal state of mind. And he states, right now, imagine something lovely for another. They need never know who was the cause for their fortune, but you will. And the reason why I'm bringing this in here is because so much of our interpretations are formed from now working with so many individuals and being on this journey of consulting and leadership and business building for so many years, as a result of our interpretations in relation to others. Because usually people are the most direct reflections of who we are. What we are interpreting and assuming within is being reflected on how we relate with others. So thus, when in doubt, we do the loving thing. And the loving thing is to imagine something lovely for another and practice this more so. Because a lot of times when we go back to point number 4, when we track or trace the attitude back to where we were as children, in which we had a disempowering or limiting experience, in which it formed a lack of self-esteem or low self-confidence based self-image. A lot of times it was based on either relating with others in a certain way or certain information that we received from others that formed this self-image. And we want to recognize that, and we want to change it. So again, the way to change it, going back in the beginning here, and I discuss this in all my videos, is to consume the information that is in harmony with your vision, be it inner conversations, what you're imagining, and external environments that stimulate the ideal self-image, as well as do it from many different perspectives. So you don't have to say the same thing over and over again to yourself. You could say the same thing in many different ways, or you could have the same experience in many different ways. You can hang around different people who affirm that ideal self-image through the way they communicate with you. You could read different books or listen to different audio programs or watch different videos that say the same thing from many different perspectives, all saturating the subconscious and thus expressing as how you relate, how you behave, and what is expressed. If you want to copy this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.